Thank you. Wow, look at this. We're even starting a little early. Love it. A couple housekeeping items. When I say SE, I specifically mean everyone who is in the solutions team. SEs, SCs, SAs, value consulting, all the names. So it's not just sales engineers I'm talking about here. And also, this was Amyra's suggestion. We would love it if you got a pen and paper or got your notes ready and wrote down 3 things that you hear during this session that you can take back to your team and implement tomorrow. All right, so with that, please welcome my esteemed guests and friends. We have Cal Watson, a fellow PSC member and seasoned senior solutions architect from Mendix, where he helps developers build better software faster. We also have my selling sister, Lynn. She was my AE over at Clary, where she's been the #1 sales performer for the last 5 years. And if you haven't heard, they are the revenue operations platform. And she's also an instructor for SV Academy. So if you want to up your sales chops, check them out. And then my mentor, Amyra de Carion, she is a proven sales leader and currently the Senior VP of Global Sales at Accurate. They are the trusted provider of global employment background screening and workforce monitoring services. And she's also a member of the Revenue Collective and a mentor for Girls Club, and was named one of the most influential women in sales by Sales Hacker. Yeah, we've got a lot of experience here on the phone with you all. And we're ready to talk about the never-ending, most hottest topic. Why is it so important that sales and SEs collaborate together? And before we answer that question for the whole panel, I just want to share screen for a moment. I know that's not common on a panel, but I have a visual as to what could possibly go wrong if we don't prep and debrief and sell well together. This is one of my favorite shows. I wish it was still on air. So I'll open up to the floor. Why is it so important that we prep and get on the same page before we just show up? Because we're all seasoned. We know what we're doing. Why can't we just wing it?
For me, it's very important just to understand the prospect. Like, you're investing a lot of your time, the SE's investing their time. And so we want to make the biggest impact for the actual customer or what we're hoping to get out of that meeting. And so you could waste a full hour or waste 30 minutes of your time, but it's being very tailored around what pain points do you want to touch on? How do you want to touch on those? How do you want to drive the conversation to the outcomes that you're looking to deliver? So for me, it's just making sure that the prospect gets the most out of the time that they've signed up for.
Yeah, and for me, it's all about I want to hear your excitement as an AE in the account. I want to know, why are we in the room with the prospect? What is your gut feel in the account? Like, I don't really need you to, give me their information I can look up online, but I really want to understand, how do you feel about the account and where you want to go with it.
Yeah, and I think there's this quote that I love to use, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so I think it is, if you're truly selling as a team and you're winning as one, the only way to really do that is to make sure that you're taking people along on that journey with you, right? Like, I may have had, it's possible as a sales rep, I've had a couple calls. I could have an entire strategy around how I want to approach this and what I want to highlight, and most certainly what I don't want to. And I have to make sure I'm communicating with the other person on the other side of this call to make sure that we actually come across as a united front to the client, right? They're watching how we work together. And if we're not in sync, that can actually send off some red flags to the client.
And for me, I don't know about you all, but we're not mapped here at Eightfold. I could work with 20 different AEs, so I can't read minds. Like, I used to be mapped, and I had 3 AEs, and we could go in with very little prep because we knew the routine. We knew each other's cues. We knew they were going to hit this. But if you're working with an AE rarely, it's super important to get on the same page about, like, what kinds of questions do you want to answer? Where can I chime in? And then to Cal's point, sure, I could go do the research too, but now we both spent hours doing the exact same research where like if the AE could come with some research and then I could come with my point of view, then we could just get to the point a whole lot faster. So this is kind of a jab, but kind of fun to ask to my AE friends. Why is it so hard to get preps on the calendar? Seriously, like I have to ask my AEs to schedule prep. What can we as SEs do to get the AEs excited about having prep calls?
That is, I think with it, I actually, so, you know, we had talked about this before and I put a lot of thought into like, why is it so difficult? And right, I've been in sales my entire career. And I think one of the things might be it's sometimes the expectation isn't necessarily set, right? By all levels in the organization, right? So the SE might be like, hey, I'm going to schedule this. And unless that expectation is set from the top, you know, on the sales side of the house too, there's a disconnect, right? And I had actually one of my directors say the other day, you know, expectation without communication leads to frustration. I don't know why I'm so full of quotes today. But that just resonates, right? Because that just makes the SE frustrated. It makes the salesperson frustrated because they're like, why do I need to spend an hour doing this? I think if you can have it coming from the top, like this is all about alignment and this is the value that comes from prep. This is why you should do it. And I don't know about any other, if there are any sales professionals on here, but I was never taught. Like it just kind of happened. And so this isn't something that I've never taught a course on how to prep with your SE. And like, as we've sat through this, I'm like, oh, this is probably something I should do. So I think it's a combination of things probably.
Yeah, I think the other one too, which I'm a little bit guilty of this is where typically, well, at least I am, I'll speak for myself in my selling world, but I'm usually back to back on meetings. And so if I don't spend that time the day before, a week before, like, and have that dedicated time with my SE to understand what we have coming up, oftentimes that prep gets missed, right? And so for me, one thing to help myself hold each other accountable for this prep work and just the style that we're going to approach these meetings with. I usually like to think of just kind of three key things that would be helpful. So one, is it the agenda? Is it nailing down in the agenda what parts your strengths are going to come out or your peers' strengths that are going to come out on that call with you? And make sure you have ownership over who's going to talk about what. So even if you don't come with all of the lovely prep about the specific account, what you're going to be touching on in the demo, who's going to demo what, at least you have a clear understanding of the strengths that exist on the call and at what points of the call to use them. The second piece for me is just, you know, establishing what inside of that presentation you want to make sure that you cover. So as the customer walks away from that, what are the three things you as an SE or you as a seller are wanting to convey to them that they leave the meeting feeling confident about? And so even if we aren't able to do all of the prep necessary, I can come with my three things that I'm hoping to get out with the customer. And I can have a clear idea about what parts of the agenda am I going to be likely responsible for, or what key components like a customer story, a use case, what are those key things that I want the SE or the rep to cover on that call with me, and who's going to carry that tone throughout the conversation to keep that persona consistent and make it really powerful.
Yep. And Cal, what do you think makes an excellent prep?
You know, I think it really goes back to you know, understanding who's going to be in the room, you know, their roles and responsibilities, you know, and like strategy, right? Like, you know, for me, I'm aligned. So like we, you know, we get the kind of basic information pretty quickly. And that's not the hard part. It's like, you know, again, it goes back to like, what's your strategy? What's your gut feeling on this account? You know, where are you headed to go, and how can I help you kind of go down that path as we move forward within the sales cycle?
Yep. I like to start with I don't need the 2-year history of the account, but I need a brief one sentence about where the account's at right now. And then
Right.
what's the goal of this meeting? Like, are we trying to get them to want an ROI? Are we trying to convince them to let us to the next level? Like, how will we know at the end of the meeting, what will be different if we did it well? Because then I use that in the debrief. But also, I personally want to know who all is attending, not just the prospect side. I definitely need to know their titles, but again, we can look it up on LinkedIn. But if I have an SA and a product manager and an SC on the call, who's supposed to talk about what? Who's going to demo what? When do you like shush? Like we used to have a rule, you can't answer the question 3 times, only twice. Like if you're the third person you want to add to the question, you put it in the chat or you get to zip it because we have to set boundaries when we show up with a big team like that. So it's equally important who's on our side, who's on their side, and what are their roles in the call and in the deal. Amyra, what have we missed? What else do you like in a prep call?
I think for me, all of those things are exceptionally important. And I think making sure that everybody has, to your point, their role on the call, because otherwise it's just a circus. And it's really for me as the leader of a sales team, it's my salesperson's responsibility to say, here is what everybody is doing on the call. Like we're quarterbacking and we're making sure that everybody understands, right? Because it's a team sale, especially as you move into the enterprise space. And when I have 5 people I brought onto that call, everybody's kind of got to stay in their lane and understand what their role is. Otherwise, you just get this, nobody knows what everybody is doing and nobody knows who's going to answer the question. And everybody has to have a role on the call. I also think that's really important from a salesperson perspective. Like, don't just bring people in, like everybody has to have a job. So that way there's value that every person is bringing to the presentation.
Yep. And it's weird to ask this because we used to ask the reverse, but what about prepping for an on-site meeting? We're so used to Zoom now. Some people are new to the field and haven't had an on-site meeting. I had an employee whose first one was just a few months ago. So how do you prep differently for an on-site meeting versus a live demo? Lynn, back to you.
I think this one's super important because not only are you conveying a product message, right? But you're also very clearly a person. and inside of in-person meetings, there's a lot that you can play with when it comes to your style, when it comes to your presence in a meeting, when it comes to the way that you're being approached or the way that you're approaching others in person. And so some of those fine details are critical to success. The other one that is super helpful for me in prepping for on-sites is being able to do a dry run in person. If you could show up to the meeting early and do a run through, make sure your tech is okay. All of that is going to be vital, especially if you're in a hybrid meeting where there's some folks virtual, some folks that are in person. In those situations, the best practice that I always like to keep on hand is making sure that folks have the materials that you're going to be covering ahead of time. So if that's something that they can review, that way they're more focused in the meeting versus trying to pay attention to a screen or something else, you're then able to leverage that kind of behavior that happens in person and have more organic conversations. So for me, the prep looks entirely different when I'm thinking about on-sites because it's also the experience that I'm providing to the customer of what is the look, what is the feel that we're trying to provide and showing up as the executive presence that they expect.
Yeah, I'm seeing so much in the chat right now about all the tech prep. And yes, there is so much anxiety that comes with the tech in and of itself. I don't know about anybody else. I was actually going to ask this question of this team here. One thing I always make sure to do, and I know somebody's going to like judge me for definitely like killing trees, and I'm sorry that I'm not good to my environment in this particular scenario, but even just like having some type of leave behind or something that people can follow through with, just in case you know what hits the fan. Like that's always my concern. Like some of the tech isn't going to work, or we're not going to be able to get through, or whatever it might be. That's always like my biggest fear is you almost have to have like a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, just in case somebody doesn't show up, just in case somebody's flight gets canceled. Like I just feel like you need to have so many more contingency plans when you show up on site.
Yeah, and just to add to that, if if you haven't been on site or you're new to the field, one of the exercises you probably want to go through is like get the whiteboard back out, right? Because like that whiteboarding is your contingency plan a lot when you're demoing. And learn how to demo standing up and walking around a room and being able to work the space that's available to you. Because I remember, my first demo post COVID was probably about 2 years ago, and you lose that experience and you lose those things you kind of picked up on, but before we all went remote, and so you got to kind of dust those skills back off or reintroduce yourself.
Yeah, I had one customer who was so thrilled when I showed up with their agenda printed, and I would, okay, we're on page 2. And they're like, you're the only ones that did that. That made the difference. Like, okay, so printing, I'm with you, Amyra.
I've also heard, somebody was telling me the other day that I've never done this. I'm going to try it because I like the idea of actually including like name tags for everybody. So you have like little, like know who you are tags that you can put around the table if you're in person, and you actually create ones for the people that aren't there. And it's just a really nice touch in the room. And it just, again, it shows that level of preparation and the level of intentionality around knowing your client.
Bringing up those that aren't there, we didn't plan this, but the hybrid call, we just had managed session, 30 people, 20 in the room, 10 on the phone. So we nominated most of the team was in person. I was the one on the phone, and myself and my SA worked the chat. And I was also letting the SC in the room know, hey, we can't hear you. Can you stand closer to the mic? Like, can you repeat the question? Because we couldn't hear the people asking. So if you're in hybrid, the more the merrier. Bring in backup, because you can't run it all from the room.
It takes a lot more management for sure when you're hybrid. Great call out.
I'm going to skip our next planned one and just jump into one of my favorites. Pro tip: what's something that an SC or an AE should not do during prep or debriefs?
I'll say, do not bring your ego. Like you can't, you gotta, like, at the end of the day, we want to win. I think we all love to win and we want to do it the right way. And if you want to win and you want to get better, like you gotta just kind of leave your ego at the threshold of the door.
I think to that point too, it's really important just to have ownership of some of the things as well. So like just as much as you want to come to the table with information, you don't want to overload that, you want to stay focused. So like having ownership of what exactly you're trying to do on the agenda, or being open to a discussion around some of those points, because oftentimes if we just lead, at least from a seller's perspective, right? If I just lead into the conversation just being the QB and not having any insight into what other folks are thinking about, it could just change the trajectory of the meeting. So the other thing that I always like to keep in mind is just have an open mind or an open thought process around that agenda, because then the better it will become if it's crafted together versus crafted independently.
Yeah. And I think when you do a prep call from the SE's perspective, stick with the plan, but also be able to pivot, right? Like you're going to get into situations where you might have done all this prep, but someone new's in the room, someone's not there, and you have to completely kind of throw it out the door and pivot and work on your feet. So like prepping is there to help, but it's not always going to be the thing that you end up doing in the meeting.
Yep. And I'll add one more. This is kind of after the prep. I've had this happen where the AE and the SC don't see eye to eye about what should go in the demo or should be shared. It's particularly in our case, a new product that maybe wasn't ready for prime time yet. And in that case, as a manager, I prefer that the two individuals keep talking until they get to consensus. What I don't like is when they come back around to the managers like, hey, so-and-so isn't going my way. I want a different SC. Or, hey, that AE doesn't know what they're doing. I'm just going to show up with my own plan. Like, don't go rogue. Don't be the difficult person to work with. Just put on your curiosity hat, your discovery hat, ask why 5 times till you get to the root of it, because you got to be able to work together.
I also think when prepping, there can also be assumptions that are made. This is also kind of as I was thinking through some of the questions. And you walk like a duck, you talk like a duck, you must be a duck. And so we put our prospects and our customers in these little boxes, right? And because we need frameworks, we're human, right? And the framework helps. But because in that framework, there are a lot of assumptions. And I think if in the debrief, we don't question those assumptions or confirm them, then we might find ourselves going down a path that we didn't intend to go down, or we might be like, that's where the customer says, no, that doesn't really apply to us. And you're like, oh, okay. So I think that in the debrief, constantly just asking the 5 whys and questioning, like, okay, is this the right framework, or do we need to do some more discovery on this question? I think is really important.
Yep. Jumping to the actual call, how do you share ownership? How do you make sure what was prepped ends up in the call, or if you need to adjust on the fly, or if you need to nudge people back on track? How do you do that, Lynn?
Yeah, so for me, I'm a big complimentary person. So even if it's like if it's not going well, or we just need to change, or we need to pivot, or we need to kind of reel back in the conversation because it went off the rails a bit, I always like to highlight what is something good that that person is either talking about, or something that they know really well, or like how passionate they seem about something, right? And then bring it back to what it relates to on the agenda that we're working through. So an example of this is like, okay, like a customer brings up a question, goes completely off the rails. Like, obviously, analytics or XYZ is super important for you. And I want to make sure that we cover that together in our relationship or throughout our evaluation period. Today, we plan to talk about this in this particular aspect. Can you give me additional feedback on other areas that we might be able to dive into that deeper, or pass it back to the SC in that case? Like, I know that we've seen this across other customers in this manner. Can you talk about, or can you show us how we've done this in the past? And so it helps bring it back, but then also is very complimentary to one, people on the call, both customer and internal. And then two, you can use that as a rapport building mechanism as well when no one really anticipates it in that moment.
Yep. For me, also, if we get off track, in the prep, it's helpful to communicate how you want to communicate during the call. Are you going to use the Zoom chat? Are you going to use Slack? Are you going to have your phone? Are you kicking them under the table? Like, how will you get in touch with me if I'm in the zone? That is a really important prep question that's not on anyone's template, but it's worth asking. All right, let's turn to debriefs. I personally like a debrief immediately after the call. But what about you, Amyra? How do you like debriefs run?
Oh, I like it right after the call. Otherwise, I don't know about anybody else, but since I had kids, like my memory is shot. And so I literally I don't remember what I had. I don't even know if I ate lunch today. And I have an empty plate sitting next to me. So I know I did, I just don't really remember it. So doing it like right after you have a good grasp of sentiment on the call, you have high fidelity around the details of the call. I feel like if you wait, it gets a little stale.
Yeah.
And then I also feel like the debrief isn't as powerful because in the moment I am also thinking, what do I want to do next? I feel like that's the piece that goes the most stale. Like I have like a couple little things like popping around. I'm like, oh, we want to do this, and this, and then give me an hour and it's gone. And I'm like, oh yeah, whatever, next steps. So that's for me, like right away, it's why it's most important.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. We do debriefs immediately after the call, and like Amyra said, it's about finding that next thread to tug on, or that next lever to pull to figure out what's next, right? And it's also cathartic, right? You might have this like terrible call that's like, you want to go and just like kind of, yell at each other about, because it's a good kind of cathartic response to, something that may have been poorly or gone poorly or was intense, or, so on and so forth.
I think the other thing that's really helpful too about debriefs right after the call is just aligning on who's going to take responsibility for what coming out of that. And that way the follow-up to the customer is very prompt and it's very distinct on who's going to be managing what. And I think the other thing that brings out too is an opportunity to kind of team together from an AE and SE perspective on what is those learnings that we want to highlight? How are we going to showcase what we've done and why it's applicable to them? And I think it's a miss for a lot of teams because a lot of AEs and SEs know that stuff very well, but they'll sit in their minds with it, and then an AE is not running with that play, right? So I think to Cal's point, it's knowing what is that future tug that we're doing or strategy that we're playing coming out of that meeting, and then knowing how we can continue to thread on that, not only as that follow-up email comes, but the next meeting, the following meeting, the next touch point, another email over the top of another one, right? Like we want to come off as a team versus like, I am a seller and this is a technical person that's on with me.
There was a great point made in the chat for on-sites, get away from the building. Like don't be any, and even be like, just make sure you're not even within like a 2-mile vicinity of the prospect, because they might be sitting next to you at lunch. So just, I think that's a really good piece of advice.
Yeah.
My previous CEO would not talk until we were out of the building. I remember I tried to make like chit chat with him in the elevator, and he just was like,
Yeah.
it's a jinx. I just can't do it. I won't do it.
Mhm.
I'll share with you what we are sharing with our AEs today. We're having kickoff. I'm playing hooky for this. But we're training them on preps and debriefs. And this is the debrief template that we're asking everyone to do. And our new sales leadership is mandating when you schedule a demo, you're scheduling 3 meetings, the prep, the meeting, and the debrief right after. So this is what we're asking our reps to do. Our AEs, sorry, I'm trying to get reps out of my vocabulary. But what I like here is that they made sure to call it out. It's even before you call your champion or your coach at the customer. You have to talk to your team because they might have follow-ups or questions or next steps that you might not have been aware of. So you really want to take time to talk about those action items and follow-ups. But my favorite part is radical candor moment. If you are on a debrief, you're not just debriefing about the deal, but you want to get better. You should have the growth mindset. And if you want to give feedback to somebody, radical candor would say you have to be willing to receive it back. So I like to lead with, hey, I thought I could have done better here, or I thought this went really well. What do you think? What could I have done better first? And that like gets people loose and then perhaps encourages them by leading by example that they might go, you know what, my closing could have been better too. Next time we'll do it this way. So rather than pouncing on someone with your feedback, do a little self-feedback first and warm up the room. And we'll share some of these templates after the call too. All right, let me get back my questions. Every time I do that, I lose my questions. There we go. All right. And how do you ensure consistency? Like I just shared, our new sales leadership has a great opportunity to come in and say this, but not every company has that. How do you make sure this happens? Do you measure it? Like, how does this work into a sales process?
It was interesting. I saw somebody earlier. I'm like kind of watching the chats. And somebody earlier said, "Hey, if we don't do a prep, I won't do the demo." It's kind of like I need a prep in order for me to show up. And I think as long as, and I actually don't disagree with that, because we have to, I mean, yes, we have to be nimble, but there has to be some type of like, either the sales reps got to tee you up, and sometimes things happen last minute. They shouldn't, because we need to make sure if we're all on the team, we're prepping each other and we know what's happening. So I think part of this comes, how do you make sure it happens? Is that we all have to be willing to say no to our prospects sometimes when they need something last minute, and we say, hey, can we actually meet at the end of day today instead of first thing in the morning? So I think there are options there, and you have to have your leadership support, right? Because your 2 leaders have to be aligned in order for that all to work and to trickle down.
And I think you have to bubble up the success of these things, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have a prep call and it leads to like a better outcome, like let people know that, like, call out to the reps manager and the your manager and like let the team know how it's going, and more of it will come. Success breeds success, right? Like,
I think the other point too is just like clear communication about these things. So like holding each other accountable in ways and measuring that in terms of like for me, I like to do a 1 week check-in at least with my SE and then figure out how we did on all of our prep and debriefs. And then in addition to that, one of the things I do to help with my clear communication is just regular updates. So whether that be an account channel or an account team or different avenues like that, or like we obviously use Clary for some of this stuff where we're entering that into our notes, but it's also keeping understanding of how is that developing success within the account or within the opportunity. And I think tracking some of that stuff helps bring clarity to some of those goals. And then in addition to that, if you're using an avenue that opens it up beyond just the team of you as an AE and SE, it provides an avenue for other folks, cross-functional leaders to come in as well and add some insights to your prep that you've done with your SE. So like I highly recommend using either channels or some other forum that opens it up to just more than you and your SE, because as we all learned here, like it'd be really great if we're able to do all this stuff together, but a lot more brains put together, I think, could be even more beneficial.
So what's the shortcut version of this? If you can't, there's just no time. You're on a plane, whatever. We get busy sometimes, we just can't prep. What's the next best alternative?
Then it's async. Then you're providing everything that somebody needs to know in a document ahead of time, any way you can. Oh gosh, doing it on the fly terrifies me, especially if it's a really large prospect. Like you have one shot to shine and you have one shot to really screw it up. So yeah, then it's got to be, then you can do something async. If you don't do something live, I think that absolutely works.
Yep. I love a good Slack channel for every deal. I've got a Slack channel.
Mhm.
So that's like a good, hey, I'm on the flight, but I can chat. Um,
Yeah.
that's a good way to be live and collaborate, but still have it all written down.
Yeah.
The other thing I think
Super
that's helpful too is providing some of those materials beforehand. So if it's a deck that you've put together for the event, or if it's certain people that are going to be attending that meeting with you, just preparing them with even that information is going to be critical. Like who is going to be in the meeting? What are they hoping to get out of the meeting? And what is the agenda? And what ways am I thinking you're going to be able to dive in with me on this agenda? Like what key areas do I think you'll be valuable in adding to the conversation? So even if it's, look, we haven't fully prepped, they at least know the directionality of the meeting, and we can chat on the side or as need be as the meeting goes through, but at least we have an understanding of who's in there, what we're trying to accomplish with each one of them.
Yep. All right. I think we're at time. Chris, keep me honest. Do we have more time?
Well, we started a few minutes early, and but we can wrap up anytime you'd like. We've got a few more minutes if you guys want to take some of the questions.
Yeah, I was just reading the questions that already came in. I think we covered them all except for best practices on researching a client. I personally, if they're public, love a 10K. I look at their company website, but if they're not public, then back channel references. If you know anyone there, like if you have a friend that works in recruiting, give them a call, ask them what's going on. Read their blogs, follow the people you're going to talk to. They might be doing a webinar or podcast, and you can hear what they care about. They might have hired somebody important recently. What else, Cal? What do you grab?
So I'll look at job postings a lot, like who are they hiring for? Especially on the technical side, like we sell it. Mendix is a very technical platform, so like I want to know kind of what's your kind of IT landscape look like, and you can kind of figure that out by looking at who they're hiring for.
I'll add one too, Diana. I'm a big GPT gal. I don't know if I have any other friendlies on the chat here that are also that way, but I'm big on sharing just like what's my short, skinny, like things that I want to learn about a customer. But the thing that I do like about interacting with GPT on this is being able to source other news articles that are beyond what I'm looking at. So things that I typically would ask my G2P is like, what are strategic elements that the company has outlined? What are ways that my company with these typical pain points would typically address some of these elements? That way it can help me formulate a strategy, and I'm almost using it as a brainstorming exercise, less of like, just tell me everything so I can present it. And then you're able to share that with your SE and kind of get their perspective to refine what that looks like. So I'm a big proponent on shortcuts and work smart, not hard through GPTs.
Yep.
What about you, Amyra? Any last words of advice on research?
The chat GPT one is golden, especially for those of us that have been in this for a long time. Like, this is game changing, because it used to be we would spend hours doing all this research and go down the rabbit hole. And now I can just type in my question. So for me, that's like the pro tip here. Like, use it, especially if you're doing industry research, company research. I know it's the only challenge that I've seen is that the information can be a little bit outdated. So I think that's the biggest challenge you're going to face. But if you're looking at like, what are the key issues at a particular, okay, so Gemini isn't, but Chat GPT might, that you can at least get some good industry trends there too. Like, what might this persona be interested in this particular industry? I think it helps narrow down some of your top tracks.
Yep. And I saw a request to share the questions and our notes, and I think I see a blog post coming, Chris, on this topic. But go ahead. I got permission. You can screenshot this. This is our debrief one. And then I'll go to our prep one in just a second. I didn't share that one yet. So get your command 4. What is it on Mac? Command 4. Screen grab that. And then this was basically our prep is you got to talk about these things in a prep call together. Who, what, how are we going to help them? And what does that mean for them?
Sounds great. You're right. I see a lot of content, and just like we've all discussed, you can take this and you can make so much out of it. So thank you so much.